president with kind of a goofy look on his face, and you know, that was like an epiphany to me, is just, you know, this and I also knew by then that I was gay, and I could see how politics were already starting to be problematic for gay people. This was in the early 80s in Lincoln, Nebraska, and there had been an effort to get our city council to pass a non-discrimination ordinance, like we've since seen in, you know, hundreds of cities since then. And so so I was feeling conflicted about the myth of objective journalism. And so that's why weekly newspaper, the alt weekly newspaper formats, I felt like it fit very well for me, because we could write long stories. We could go into a lot of depth about a particular topic. We didn't have to keep it to 10 inches. And we could explore all sides of the story. And I've often come to believe as a journalist that most of the time there are not two sides to a story. Usually there are many sides to a story. Often there is, you know, one side to the story. And so if you think about the idea of complexity, which is something that I feel like I've explored a lot in the last year writing for the Kansas Reflector. If you view the world as a very complex place, then it's pretty hard to break it down into two sides, right, left, red, blue, etc. So if you saw the pitch, or if you were familiar with similar publications in other big cities, the Village Voice is the iconic one in New York City, but there was the LA Weekly, the Chicago Reader, the San Francisco. There were a couple of them in San Francisco. A lot of them are still in existence, but the economic pressures that have killed newspapers or almost killed newspapers over the last 30 years also did their damage to alt weeklies. So I left the pitch in 2010. I worked for a little while in academic communications at the University of Kansas Medical Center. And then I went to KCUR, which is Kansas City's NPR affiliate, and I learned how to do radio, which was really fun. And in the meantime, I just wrote this book, which I think some of you have read and may be interested in hearing more about. And then a year ago, I joined up with Sherman Smith and Tim Carpenter of the Topeka Capital Journal to launch the Kansas Reflector. And this is a new model of journalism. So it's nonprofit journalism, and I feel like that's the future of journalism. And it's not unlike the NPR model. It's member supported, and we are an outlet for States Newsroom, which is a national network of these news websites that are based in state capitals around the country. And I don't know how many there actually are in that network now. I think there were about a dozen when we launched a year ago, and I think they've added about a dozen in the time since we've been up and running. So this is an organization that really understands that, as I believe, that the future of our country really rests at this point on state legislatures, which is a pretty frightening thought when you consider the condition of a lot of them. So for the last year, I've been writing about a lot of that stuff, and I've also been editing. So part of my job as the opinion editor at the Reflector is to write my own columns, which I've done a lot of, but also to solicit and edit guest commentaries. And so we run anywhere from 4 to 6 guest commentaries per week. So that's a lot of voices from around the whole state of Kansas. And we've had a lot of different folks weigh in, and it's been a real joy to work with everyone who's contributed to that section. And I'm real proud of the sort of array of voices that we've had. We've had high school kids, we've had Kathleen Sebelius, and folks sort of everywhere in between. Not that that's a linear line, but I just think it's been a great conversation that's been underway on our opinion page for the last year. So that's maybe the short version. And what could I tell you next?
All right, we're unmuted now. I want to know what made you decide to write this book? Like all these great stories, just meeting all these people, and maybe how you decided to pick the people in this book.
So the book came about. I had the idea for the book in the summer of 2013. So what is that? 8 years ago now. And a lot of you, I'm imagining in this room, remember the time in Kansas in 2004 and 2005 when there was a big push to try to get the people of Kansas to pass a constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriage, declaring that marriage was one man and one woman, and that this was happening all over the country. It was particularly ugly in Kansas. It took 2 sessions of the legislature to put that on the statewide ballot. And I had covered all of that activity as a journalist. And it was super painful time in my life to sort of watch that happen all over the country, but especially in the place that I love. And I remember having this feeling in 2005 after Kansas passed the marriage amendment. I remember I had a family event down in Oklahoma City, and I had to drive from my home in Kansas City down I-35 through the Flint Hills, through Wichita to Oklahoma City. And I remember just feeling so horrible on that drive, like this landscape, this place had always felt so beautiful and so sacred to me. And 70% of Kansans had just voted to ban same-sex marriage. 70%. So when you think about what it feels like for 70% of your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers to walk into the nearest voting booth and vote against you, that hurts. And I remember on that drive just feeling like this sacred place was now hostile territory. And so I paid attention over the years when, even though I wasn't reporting in Kansas, I was in Kansas City, doing Kansas City journalism, but I was aware when Manhattan and Salina and Hutchinson had tried to pass non-discrimination ordinances and what had happened in those cases. And then as the idea about gay marriage became less controversial and more people started to be okay with same-sex marriage and the legal cases started making their way up to the Supreme Court, I just saw this change in public opinion happening. And so by the summer of 2013, because I've read the book, then you know that there's this part in it. And if you haven't, well, what happens? So the Supreme Court decision legalizing gay marriage across the country is June of 2015. 2 years before that, the Supreme Court rules on a couple of smaller cases, the Prop 8 case in California and the Defense of Marriage Act case involving Edie Windsor. And so gay marriage gets to be legal a little bit in some places. And there was this rally in downtown Kansas City, and everyone was celebrating this historic Supreme Court ruling that didn't apply to us. Same-sex marriage was still banned in Kansas. It was still banned in Missouri. And as one of the folks in the book said, you could drive up to Iowa and you could get legally gay married, but as soon as you came back to Kansas, you weren't legally married anymore. And I was at this rally and I thought, this is just so weird. It's such a weird moment in public public life in America, where these laws are so uneven across the country, and where, you know, the public opinion is turning in our favor, but there's still a lot of hostility. And I just thought this is a strange and unique time in our cultural and political world, and I need to write a book about this. And I know just the place to do it, because Kansas has this reputation for being Kansas, and it's right in the middle of the country, so it can sort of stand in for a lot. And it's the home of Westboro Baptist Church, which no other state in the country can claim. And you know, everyone in the whole world thinks they know about Kansas because of the stupid movie from 1937. So I thought all of those factors would make for, you know, rich material for a book. And so really, I knew I had a book when I called Tom Witt of Equality Kansas, and I said, Tom, hey, you remember the days back in 2004, 2005, when, you know, the marriage amendment battle was going on in Kansas. Can you tell me anyone who has a particularly intense story from those days, either something, you know, really big that happened, really bad, or really good that happened to them as a result of their work on the marriage amendment? And he said, call Sandra Stenzel. And so I called Sandra from out in Trigo County. And as soon as Sandra shared her story with me, which she did, it was very painful for Sandra and for a lot of people who I talked to recap this very, very painful time in their lives. But everybody shared their stories with me super generously. And, you know, I just began taping, and I organized the book sort of chronologically, but also geographically based on what had happened in that decade between 2005, when Kansas passed its gay marriage amendment, and 2015, when the Supreme Court made same-sex marriage the law of the land, and how public opinion changed by the time of the Obergefell decision in 2015. You know, I think it's 55% of Americans are completely fine with gay marriage. So you go first from 70% against to 55% being fine. And that's a dramatic shift in public opinion over 10 years. And I think part of the question was how I found people to talk to. And there was usually sort of a core of activists in the towns that I wrote about. These are people whose names had been in the papers generally, and who had a little bit of a public presence. And so they weren't that hard to find, and they were already used to talking to journalists. And that's usually how it started.
Thank you very much. Is this working out over there? No, then we're just gonna, sorry, trying the microphone to help. Not for me. The thing that you said that was interesting in that last bit was the whole thing is interesting. We went from 70% against gay marriage to 55%, just, you know, whatever. And that's, I think that part of that, though, is the electorate that turns out for those ballot issues. What year? So that was that a presidential election year?
2016. Well, this is a combination of all sorts of things going on. There's not one particular explanation for this change in public opinion, but there are a few big ones that happen. Okay, so first of all, there's the legal cases that just start pretty quickly, and they take a decade to work their way through the Supreme Court. And in the meantime, they get a lot of attention in the media, and these are very sympathetic people who are the plaintiffs in these cases. And so there's a lot of education that goes on in the media around the legal what I would say tactic or strategy. there's also just sort of a public opinion, a public relations campaign when the big national gay organizations sort of come up with this slogan that love is love. Okay. I think what happened is in 2004, especially, gay marriage was used as a wedge issue in the election between George Bush and John Kerry. And John Kerry, and this is a big theme throughout all of this decade, is how timid Democrats are in combating these social wedge issues. Okay, so all of the big Democrats were really too scared to say same-sex marriage is fine. I'm fine with same-sex marriage. In Kansas, it was Republicans who were standing up to say, you know, this is legislative bullying. You know, Democrats were too sort of spineless to take up this cause in those days. And so it definitely was a successful political weapon in 2004. But as soon as the sort of national organizations got off of defense and went on offense to sort of try to educate the people of the country that love is love, I think that really resonated. They had a good, simple, powerful slogan. The thing that I write about in my book is how those two efforts were really complemented, or not even complemented. The real way in which public opinion changed, I argue, is through super grassroots efforts. And I like to describe the activists that I wrote about as so grassroots that they're in the dirt. And these are, you know, a handful of people in a place like Salina or Hutchinson or Manhattan, lots of other towns in Kansas since, who are taking an issue like a non-discrimination ordinance to City Hall, saying, please add us to your non-discrimination clause that you already have for the city. And knowing that they might lose, the city commission might vote against them, or if the city commission passes it, then there might be a referendum to reverse it. And all of these things happened in these cities. But what happened is you have all these hearings at City Hall, you have newspaper coverage, you have town hall meetings, you have neighbors going to talk to each other. And every time you do that, you might lose at the ballot box, but you've made all of these, you've educated the town, you've made all these friends, people have come out in support of you. And you do that enough times, you can lose, but you've built up enough friends that eventually maybe the fourth time you win. And so through process of education and infrastructure building, data gathering, every time there's an election, you can sort of see where the votes are and how they're going. And so this is a long game that a lot of the activists in Kansas played, sometimes intentionally and sometimes just, you know, reactively. And Harvey Milk always said, come out wherever you are. And I think that's what really changed public opinion is, you know, more LGBT people saying to their families, coworkers, neighbors, look, if you go to the ballot box and vote against this, you're voting against me. And, you know, you like me, okay, and you're going to really hurt me if you do this. And so I think that effort in places, you know, in the heartland, in the red states, that combined with, you know, the legal stream that was going on and the PR Love is Love campaign. And I also think, you know, pop culture changed in that decade. And so you had more visibility on shows like Glee and in music and elsewhere. So there's not one magic strategy to any of this.
Yes, go ahead.
I have a question about your process for writing. Was this the first book you ever wrote? And how was the publishing process? Just kind of like a boring logistical question.
This was the first book I ever wrote, and writing books is kind of dumb. You will never you will never make enough money to compensate for the amount of time and effort that you put into it. But I was driven, for me, I was driven by the power of the stories that everyone was telling me. I really felt, so I had a day job at the public radio station, and I would go do my day job, but I on the weekends, I would often drive to towns around Kansas, and I would go on these reporting trips, and those trips were fun, and I met fun, cool people. And then during the weekday mornings, I would spend an hour or two. Again, I would get up at 5 o'clock, and I would walk my dogs and write for an hour or two. And so that's how that book came together over a couple of years. And so I had to be very disciplined about it, but I got that. It wasn't hard to have that discipline because the stories that people were telling me were so powerful and so consequential. And I really felt a responsibility to the people that I was writing about to get their stories out there, because, you know, it had taken some real courage for them to share those stories. So for me, that's sort of how it happened. It was a very collaborative process between my sources and I gained power through them. And writing even short pieces like I do these days, but certainly a long book it's physically hard. Okay, you have to sit someplace and focus and put words into a Word doc, and sometimes all of those words one day are just a pile of steaming crap, and the next day you look at them again and you're like, oh, that was a pile of steaming crap, but here I can fix it. And so if there are English teachers in the room, I will reinforce what the message always is, which is revise, 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 revise. And what else can I tell you about writing a book? Selling a book to a publisher is a very painful ordeal also. I shopped this book around New York City, and I had an agent for a while, and we tried really hard with major publishing companies, and those editors said, you know, this is really well written and it's a really important topic, but we just don't think it's going to sell. So I got rejected a lot. Excuse me, I was reporting in Western Kansas last week, and now I know what hay fever means. So when it became clear that New York major commercial publishers were not interested, I approached the University Press of Kansas, and they instantly said, yes, we would like this book. And I worked with a great editor there, and it went through the process of peer review, which was helpful also. And they made a really beautiful book. And, you know, it's, for me, this was never about trying to be a bestseller. But I think this book has sold well by academic press standards. But what's most important to me is I feel like it's really reached the audiences that it needs to reach. And I know that based on a lot of the feedback that I've gotten from readers.
Thank you. That was great. Larry.
Hi, CJ. Larry Ryan here. Thank you again for the wonderful profile that you did on me last year. It was really, really cool. And I wondered, you were talking about process. How did you get to the whole thing when Sandra and I were talking about the abortion question? It got a little semantically reactive, I think, between Sandra and myself, or I was using stay out of my, stay out of a woman's, I will stay out of a woman's fetus. And you were gonna say, no, stay out of a woman's, rather a vagina, stay out of the uterus. And we got into this semantic argument between uteruses and vaginas. And you made it into
Exactly semantic, but go ahead.
it was kind of, it almost got comical, and you made it fun. And how did you get to that when we were processing that story?
Well, you had tweeted about it. So I saw your tweet and I thought, I could have fun with this. And, because, I for those of you who didn't see it, and I can't remember exactly how you said it, Larry, but you said you tweeted something you were running for office and you're, a Democrat in deep red territory and abortion is a big issue in Kansas. And you tweeted something to the effect of, hey, vote for me, and women, I won't, I wish I could remember how you actually said it. Maybe you can find it and share it.
An old girlfriend of mine who had said, oh, I'm sorry. It was about an old girlfriend of mine who had said to me, buddy, you better stay out of my, it says, if you think you're gonna mess with anybody's vagina, you're out of your mind. And then it got into this argument over the other body parts.
Yeah, so your tweet was, I won't be, you won't have to worry about me being in, I'm not gonna be able to say it right, but it was like, I'm not gonna be concerned about your vagina, and guys, I'll, something about not worried about STDs or something. But the point, the implication was, was that you as a politician in Kansas believed that women had the right to choose about their own health care. That was the point of your tweet. And the fact that you had, referred to a close but not exact body part to the uterus was just, prime column material. I don't know how much we need to labor the point, but.
But at least we got into the ideas of what I was trying to say beyond it too. And I appreciate that. But you did a wonderful job. I wish more people would see it. I wish more people further west of here would see it.
Well, I think one thing I tried to do in the column always was provide a different view on what the standard narrative about Kansas is.
I have a quick question. Yes, I want to know how the documentary for the book is going. Yeah, the book is amazing, so I can't wait to see how that's coming along.
Is there a question or just status update or?
Do you want to share with us about the documentary that's in process? We only have an announcement as far as I've seen so far. Is that accurate, or you got some work to report?
Well, we thought we'd finished shooting around the end of last year. So you asked about writing a book earlier. Never make a movie. Movie making, as a writer I was sort of in control of my own process, but being part of a production team for a documentary film, nothing is under my control. So I've had to become very patient, and movie production takes a really long time. So we started, it's been at least 3 years ago. It might be 4 years ago at this point. I've lost track, maybe because I've just blocked it out. But we thought we were done shooting and ready to edit and be in what's called post-production. We thought we were finished last fall. And then this legislative session happened. And so, and the movie was really sort of shaping up to be a sequel to the book, because the action of the book ends right around the 2016 election. And what happened in Kansas right after that is Sharice Davids gets elected to Congress from the 3rd district. So you have a lesbian American Indian from Kansas going to Congress. You had 2 openly gay people elected to the Kansas House of Representatives. And, you know, that sort of, all of that happened after my book came out. So we were gonna sort of start that. We were gonna recap the book a little bit, talk about the amazing, great progress that had happened in Kansas and the surprising ways in which LGBT people are actually leading now in Kansas. And so all that was great, yay, rah, rah. Then we ran straight into this legislative session where we see all of these anti-trans bills coming up, not only in Kansas, but all around the rest of the country. And so we sort of stopped what we were doing in terms of editing the film, and we shot a bunch of new material over the last 6 months. And so that set us behind even more, but it tells a much more true story now of where we are in this country. And so I have no idea when we'll be done. But we have really compelling new material from people who are fighting a whole new battle for human rights at this point in Kansas.
Were you able to get some of the person who you featured in the book to participate? Were you able to revisit some of their stories and make support? Yeah, we have some of that, definitely, but a movie needs a sort of more focused, narrow narrative arc. A book can spread out a little bit, but with a movie, you sort of need some main characters. And I'm not exactly at this point even sure how Kevin Wilmot will decide who all ends up being those main characters in the book. We've interviewed a lot of people for the book, for the movie, and you know, getting really probably days of tape now into 60 minutes for a PBS style documentary. I don't know how they're going to do it, but that's not my job.
Yeah, you mentioned that the Reflector is a subscription service. I mean, I read it all the time. How do I support it financially?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
You mentioned that the Reflector that you write on, that was like a subscription service. How is it funded?
It's funded, it's a nonprofit, and it's funded by donations that come in nationally to the national office in Washington, D.C. and North Carolina, and also by Kansans. So, and I don't know how many Kansas folks are contributors.
How do you contribute financially?
How do we sign up?
Yeah,
How does it distribute?
It's all online. So you can go to the website, and I think there's a button that says donate, and it'll send you to a way to donate.
Oh, I've gone to the website, but I'll look again and see if I can find it, because I couldn't find it. Well, I probably didn't look in the right place.
Yeah, well, I'll pull it up here. When we take all of your time, I'll pull it up and you can see where to do that. Okay, anyone? I've got a few more too. So anyone? Celeste and yeah, and okay, so I don't want to go off track on this, but on Thursday we have a
I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Come closer to the laptop, if the microphone is over there.
So on Thursday, we have a group that is led by Peggy Mast, who is coming to talk about liberal indoctrination and the evils and how to identify and fight against liberal activists. And so I would ask, given your experience with grassroots activists, what are some steps that we can take immediately to not let that kind of talk become the message and the way that this part of Kansas is known?
Thank you for that question. And I think I'll go back to what I said about Harvey Milk saying, come out wherever you are. And I might ramble a little bit, but I've been thinking about this a lot. I feel like there's a sense in Kansas, especially because the senators are so entrenched entrenched and unresponsive. I hear this a lot, that it's pointless to contact Jerry Moran's office because he's not going to do anything, or it's pointless to write to my state rep or my state senator because they never respond. And so I feel like over decades, Kansans, Democrats, progressives, liberals, however you want to define yourself, a lot of people in Kansas have just sort of surrendered, have felt disempowered, have felt voiceless. And I wrote a column last fall about all of the House and Senate races in Kansas where Democrats didn't even run anyone. And there are a few races where, in highly Democratic areas where Republicans didn't run either. So this phenomenon isn't solely about Democrats, but there's just so many seats in the legislature that are uncontested. And it cannot be any fun to run for office in a place where you lose 80-20. And I see some folks consoling Larry back there, but God bless Larry, because he ran, and every time, and I think we see this working in Johnson County. So no Democrats ever won in Johnson County, and these days sometimes Democrats do win, and sometimes they lose, but their margins of loss keep getting narrower and narrower. And that's that long game that I was talking about earlier. And so there's the strategy of electoral countering of that message that you asked about, but I also just feel like everyone at this point in American life has to speak up. You have to have those difficult conversations. When people say things nearby that you find unacceptable, we have to say something. And it's, I'm not even very good at this. I was in conversations in Smith County last week where, I've been thinking ever since, I wish I would have said X, or I wish I would have, asked a question and had one more, carried the conversation a little bit farther. But that's what gay people did, okay? Gay people said, Mom, Dad, I'm gay. Stop being anti-gay. Now trans people are, Mom, Dad, I'm trans. And, parents are learning that this, the world is changing. And so if we can do that, Democrats can say, hey, I'm a Democrat, and I think it's the same response that we have to give when we hear people say racist things. We can't just not be racist ourselves. We have to be actively anti-racist. And so there's not one easy answer to your question, but I think taking control of your own narrative in your own community with your own friends and families and neighbors. I personally don't know a more effective tactic than that. And realizing that this is a big, complex problem, and it's going to take long, sustained effort.
That was really great. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone? You might have to come up. You want to- Sorry.
With the recent news about the transgender woman who is in the Olympics, what do you foresee happening? And is there anything the public can do to change the overall opinion of what a mess that is?
The reason that the rhetoric about transgender women in sports, the reason that has become such an effective wedge issue, the same way gay marriage was in 2004. Okay, transgender women participating in sports is absolutely not a threat to sports as we know it. However, there's a lot of people who don't understand that. They can't get their heads around it. They don't understand, they don't know enough trans people. They don't understand anything about transgender physiology or hormones or athletics in general, to not feel threatened by this. And so what we have to do is to recognize that this is not about sports. This is about politics. And transgender people are being used as cannon fodder to try and make people afraid so that they will vote a certain way. It's being used as a political wedge issue within Democratic circles, even, because, you know, there are a lot of Democrats, and I've heard directly from them, who can't quite get their head around this because they don't understand anything about transgender, and they have daughters, and they can imagine, you know, their daughters somehow being, you know, losing out on some kind of opportunity. And if you're in sports, chances are you're going to lose in your events, whether it's a trans person or not. And so I think the most important thing, you know, there's a lot we don't know about the science of athletics in general. And the science of athletics in general will continue to change and evolve. But this is not about that. This is about politics, pure and simple. And it's about a very marginalized community with minuscule political power being bludgeoned as a tactic to divide voters.
Thank you. Yes, yeah. Okay, please.
Dan, you got me last fall, but not bad.
Wait, hi, I can't see you.
Sorry.
Oh, hi, hi.
I was just gonna say, I think one of the takeaways is the whole, like, the gay marriage to now. They're losing. Like they're losing in a sense that the things are getting so desperate that I remember people I know saying it was Antifa as January 6th was unfolding. And it was clearly not. And the level of sort of the cognitive dissonance is such that you can only go so far. Eventually people would begin to kind of like, oh, Trump who? You know, and I think that it's pretty bleak, but I think if we zoom out, conservatives are running out of ghost stories to tell to keep this economic thing going that they've been doing since 1968. And so it's sort of, it is like that thing on Thursday is pretty gnarly, but at the same time, it's free. And that tells me that it's an outside organization that's funding it, or else they would have charged. And if they would have charged, less people would have showed up. So they're doing it for free and it has to be outside funding. So it's just, there's a level of desperation just around that and the fact that we're playing with these ghost stories. And so I find it somewhat optimistic. I don't find January 6th optimistic, but when you have a group of people that were all about Blue Lives Matter and they murder 5 police and injure hundreds, there's something going on with that. Like, as we used to say, jumping the shark, right? Like something shifting. So I think that's an interesting, I always go back to my in-laws who are conservative. And I'm like, so what do you think about gay marriage now? Like, I remember in 2000, we kind of had like a go-between, and then 2004, that's what remember the Iraq war was going on. The only thing they had was gay marriage. And so that got him reelected, and then we kept going. So I think there's definitely like some positive elements to this.
I mean, I think we're at a really dangerous place right now, just because of the electoral situation and the efforts to suppress the way we vote, the access and the legitimacy of the voting process in the country, and that's what worries me the most. And the good news is, I think a lot of people are really worried right now. And, if we continue ever more moving toward minority rule, then, I think it's going to be really ugly for a long time. So I think we are in a really dangerous place, but if the institutions hold and we can recover from the damage that's already done, then I do think we're in the final throes of a lot of racism and a lot of homophobia and transphobia and all of these systemic ways that we've allowed vulnerable people to be used so that those in power can just keep amassing more power. I think when you have these conversations with your neighbors, I mean, the question that I always ask folks is, who's getting hurt in this situation? Who's the person with the power, and who's the person who thinks that someone else is a threat? And is the person who's being presented as a threat really a threat? And to what?
I have one more question. Go ahead.
Okay. I again, CJ Larry here. I had just received a flash from one of my very conservative friends in Colorado, very ex-military kind of guy, and he says, I want my republic back, and we're going to take it from all of you damn Democrats if we have to do it by physical force. And I said, and he says to me, you're all a bunch of damn Marxists anyway. And I said, which Marx is it? Groucho, Zeppo, Harpo? I said, do you even understand who Karl Marx was? And what the benefit, have you ever read the manifesto? Probably not. And I said to him, you know, before you go around reading off the same old crap from OAN and Fox and Newsmax and all this other crap, why don't you come out and live with real people again, instead of hanging out with the militarists and your phony tough and your fake brain, and get out here and really fight a war, get some battle out here. If you want battle, fine, we can go ahead and do that, but you'll lose. Truth will always win out. And I just got pissed. I've known him since he was 6 years old.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Hey, I don't want to take too much more, but I'm obsessed with that. You did an interview with Rush Limbaugh before he really gave his big break. So we just, I thought here just a little bit about that, you know.
I couldn't quite understand everything that you said, but I did interview Rush Limbaugh. It was 30 years ago. I pulled out the cover of the pitch, and here's the cover of what that looked like. I'm not sure what I can say about it. He was big by then. He was a rising star, but he wasn't anywhere near as big as he became. And so he was still willing to talk to a reporter from Kansas City. And he was sort of affable and jokey and pleasant on the phone. And afterwards, he did not like what I wrote about him, because I wrote about really how disgusting his show was. And he didn't like our cover illustration.
He writes children's chapter books.
I'm sorry?
He writes children's historical fiction as well, or did. He did in the past. And they're just super nationalist, fake history. They're pretty yucky. They check out though. Yeah, so you were interviewing Rush at that time. Was that before or after the Fairness Doctrine was repealed by the Reagan administration? And did that affect your work?
So that was in 1991 that I interviewed him. So well after Fairness Doctrine repeal. And I don't really have a sense of how the Fairness Doctrine, that was 91 was when I first started working at the pitch.
Okay. Questions? Tori.
I got a question too.
Oh, great. Mark, thank you. Mark.
Oh, no, if Tori was called on first, I can wait, but I just want to get in there.
Okay, go ahead, Mark.
Okay. So CJ, I haven't been able to read the book yet, but I have been able to read blurbs and blobs, and what I have read of it is pretty fascinating in terms of how you territorialize different locations. And the way I'm thinking about territorialization is in terms of accessibility and visibility amongst a common or shared group. So under what conditions does, let's say, LGBTQ people acquire visibility, and under what conditions do they acquire accessibility? And one of the things that I find fascinating is that I'm not optimistic of, and where I might differ from you, is at the local and county levels where some of these ordinances were being passed. In varying degrees, there's a question of whether or not they have the legal authority to do that in the first place. And then there's these other questions of why are they doing that when they have other, like, more important things they should be doing? And then there's a question beyond that, which is the local and county governments. I mean, do we need them in the old way that they were designed to do, which was just project the state's power because we didn't have modern communication technologies at that point in time? And when they were designed explicitly to, let's say, count property and count your wealth for purposes of taxes, distribution of funding for schools, creating your local police, but then also your state police. So now you have police systems that are layered and overlapping for the exact same laws, I might add. So there then becomes all these questions of how do those laws get equally or unequally applied, Brown v. Board and whatnot. And after reading your book, I immediately thought, what's your view of local government? Like, would you change it in some way? Would you make it work differently than the way it works now to provide better accessibility to resources to citizens that are not represented or have a minority amount of power? Is there a way that we could structurally reform our local communities?
Well, so your question is way out of the scope of my expertise.
Yeah.
And I would just say that, first of all, any municipality can add a class of people to its non-discrimination ordinance. Okay. So you have an ordinance in your county or your city government that says people cannot be discriminated against in housing, employment, and public accommodations based on age, race, marital status, religion. There's a whole list of these things. And so you can add sexual orientation and gender identity to that list. Right. That is completely legal. And I would say municipalities should add those categories. And so I don't have any sense of knowledge to base an answer on whether I think municipal governments should exist. I sort of think, if you need streets and sewers and fire departments and other public schools or public services, you probably should have some kind of entity that administers those public services. And so what we have now, and so we sort of, until we have something better, what we need to do is elect smart, good people to those positions who will operate in good faith. And I think our recent example over the last year is county health boards and county commissions who argued about mask mandates. And, not only were there really sort of dumb arguments about mask mandates, but there were also places all over the country where public servants, i.e. public health officers, were demonized because the residents of a city or a county didn't like what they were hearing from the public health experts in their city or county and got violent about that. And so what we need is people, public servants need to be smart, and the people who vote for them need to be smart about who they're electing. And we need to know as a society what we're getting. And we need to make sure that it serves the public.
Thank you. It is 7:33, and I think we committed an hour of your time. Is that about what we asked for? We did. Okay, so we have met our hour, and we thank you graciously, and you have been amazing to listen to. Thank you so much for being there on our computer for us.
Thank you all so much for having me. I'm sorry if other people have questions, and I'm happy to stay on if folks want to keep talking, but you guys have asked really, really good, smart questions, and I wish I could be there in person, but thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah, and hey,
best of luck in your next chapter, whatever that is. We hope we see you in Kansas.
You will, you will. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, CJ.
Thanks.
Great.